The autumn fair in Clover Hollow smelled of fried dough and wood smoke, and the sweetness of apples bruised at the bottom of a barrel, the kind of smell that made you believe, just for a moment, that the world was still a gentle place. Briella Finch did not believe that. Not anymore. She moved through the crowd the way she always moved, quietly, hood up, basket tucked close, her eyes finding the herb stalls and nothing else. At 27, she had become an expert at passing through spaces without leaving a mark. 3 years of wandering had made her almost invisible, which was exactly what she wanted. Invisible was safe. Invisible didn't lose things. She was reaching for a bundle of dried chamomile when she heard it. Not a cry. Not a shout. Something smaller and sharper than both. A whisper. "Will you be my mummy?" She turned, or a small boy, no older than 5, crouched at the edge of a fence post, with the full concentration of someone doing very important work. He had dark hair that curled at his ears, and storm-grey eyes, fixed on her with a seriousness so complete it felt almost like an accusation. In his cupped hands, he held a small sparrow with a drooping wing. Around the bird's tiny ankle, he had looped a piece of his own shoelace, fashioned into a careful little brace. He wasn't looking at the bird anymore. He was looking at her. "You have kind hands," he said simply. "My bird's wing is broken. I tried to fix it, but I'm not big enough yet. And I don't have a mummy. So I thought maybe you could be both." Briella's throat closed completely. She knelt. Her knees hit the cold October ground, her basket tipped sideways, and she did not care about any of it, because those storm-grey eyes were watching her with the kind of absolute, uncomplicated hope that only a child can carry, the kind that hasn't learned yet that hope can be a dangerous thing. She said yes. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his father's name either. She would. And by the time she did, that single word, yes, would have already grown roots she couldn't pull free without bleeding. The Clover Hollow Autumn Fair was the kind of event that made the whole valley forget, just for one day, that the rest of the world existed. Their stalls stretched from the old mill bridge all the way to the main square, honey jars catching the October light like rows of amber glass, pie crusts cooling on checkered cloth, children running with caramel apples held high above their heads like little torches. The air was golden. Everything smelled like something warm. Briella Finch didn't feel golden. She felt, as she usually did, like someone moving through a world designed for people who belonged in it. She kept her hood up, while she kept her basket close. She had learned long ago that the trick to passing through a crowd without being noticed was to never quite stop. Keep moving. Keep your eyes on a purpose. Don't let anyone catch you standing still long enough to ask your name. She was good at it. 3 years of practice had made her very, very good at it. Dried chamomile, she told herself. And maybe some rosehip if Clara has it. Then you leave. Clara Hobbs ran the honey stall near the east gate, or when she was the closest thing Briella had to a friend in Clover Hollow, which meant she had known her for 4 weeks. She stopped to buy from her every market day, and Clara sometimes slipped an extra jar into her basket and pretended it was a mistake. "You look like you haven't eaten since Thursday," Clara said, squinting at her over a row of amber jars. "I ate this morning," Briella said. "Toast doesn't count." "I had 2 pieces." Clara pointed at a jar of clover honey with the authority of a woman who has decided the conversation is over. "Take it. And before you argue, it's not charity, it's a trade. You left me those lavender sachets last week, and my headaches have been half what they were. We're even." Briella took the jar. She smiled, the small, real kind she reserved for moments she couldn't prevent, and tucked it into her basket. She had been moving toward the herb stalls along the far wall when she heard it. A whisper, aimed somehow, directly at her. "Will you be my mummy?" She turned. The boy was crouched beside a fence post at the edge of the nearest stall, entirely unbothered by the crowd pressing around him on all sides. He was small, couldn't have been more than 5, with dark curls slightly too long at the ears and storm-grey eyes that watched her, with a focus usually found in surgeons and very serious cats, or in his cupped hands, a sparrow. One wing drooping. Around its ankle, a piece of his own shoelace, fashioned with extraordinary small-fingered care into a soft little brace. He had stopped looking at the bird. He was looking at her. "You have kind hands," he said. He sounded completely certain about this. "My bird's wing is broken. I tried to fix it, but I'm not big enough yet." He paused, glancing around with the air of someone sharing a classified secret. "And also, I don't have a mummy, so I thought maybe you could be both." The world went very quiet inside Briella's chest. She knelt. Her knees hit the cold, slightly muddy ground, and her basket tipped sideways, and she did not care about any of it, because those grey eyes were watching her, with the uncomplicated hope of a child who simply didn't know yet that the world could look at that kind of hope and say no. "What's your name, brave one?" she managed. "Kaelin." His chin lifted with real pride. "I'm almost 6. Or don't say just 5. Papa says I'm stronger than I look." She looked at the bird in his hands, really looked, with a healer's eyes. She pressed her thumb gently to the tiny ribcage, feeling the flutter of a pulse. She ran 2 fingers along the wing, reading the angle of the damage with a touch she had spent years refining on things far less fragile than this. A soft fracture. Clean. Treatable. She could feel Kaelin watching her hands, the way a student watches a master, tracking every movement, to cataloguing it, filing it away. "Where's your papa right now, Kaelin?" she asked, without looking up. "Over there somewhere." He waved one hand vaguely at the general direction of the fair. He said, "Stay here." I stayed. Mostly. Briella almost smiled. She worked the shoelace brace free from the bird's ankle. It was impressively done for small hands, and began to reset it with a more stable knot, using a thin strip of cloth she cut from the hem of her inside pocket. "Oh, you did a good job," she told him. The idea was right. Kaelin beamed. The gap in his front teeth appeared. 2 small front teeth, growing in, slightly crooked, impossibly charming. "So you'll be my mummy?" he asked, like it was simply the next logical item on the list. Her throat tightened. Not with sadness exactly, with something more complicated than that. The way an old wound pulls when you press on it, not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to remember. "Let's start with the bird, or brave one," she said softly, "and then we'll talk about the rest." He accepted this with great solemnity, as though she had presented him with a formal agreement, and he had reviewed the terms. "Okay," he said, "but I already decided." He said it so simply. I already decided. Like the matter was settled on his end, and was now simply awaiting her paperwork. Something in Briella's chest cracked open a very small amount. She sealed it immediately. She was good at that too. What she didn't see, what she was too focused on small, broken things to notice, was the man who had gone completely still on the other side of the fairground. He was tall, broad, the kind of physical presence that made a natural space around itself in a crowd without any effort. Dark-haired, jaw tight, wearing a plain grey coat that did absolutely nothing to disguise the fact that he was someone who gave orders and had them followed. Beside him, a slightly shorter man, lean, quick-eyed, and observant, had said something twice and received no response. Harris Brock, Alpha King of the Northern Packs, was not listening to his beta. He was watching a woman kneel in the mud at a county fair beside his son, and something inside him, something he had pressed down carefully and covered over 2 years ago with grief and duty and the particular numbness that comes from forcing yourself to keep moving, shifted like a fault line. Quiet, underground, undeniable. But Armani Voss had been his beta for 12 years. He had seen Harris walk through battles, council chambers, and the worst night of his life without his expression cracking. He recognized what he was seeing now because he had only seen it once before, at a winter solstice ceremony 3 years ago, when a healer with long dark hair had laughed at something across the fire, and Harris had gone very still in exactly this way. As Armani decided he was intensely interested in the pie stall immediately to his left. He was a wise man. On the other side of the fairground, Briella stood, settling the sparrow carefully into a fold of her cloak where it could rest and stay warm. Kaelin had already taken her free hand with both of his, matter-of-factly, the way children claim things they have decided belong to them. "You can carry him," Kaelin said, meaning the bird. "He likes you already." "Oh, I can tell." "Can you?" He stopped making the scared sounds. She looked down at him. His grey eyes were earnest and open and completely without guile. She felt suddenly very tired of being invisible. One afternoon, she told herself. Just this afternoon. It doesn't have to mean anything. "All right," she said. "Let's find somewhere to sit with him." "My papa is over there," Kaelin said helpfully. "He'll want to say thank you. He always says thank you for things. Well, he says it's important." She let herself be tugged forward by a small, insistent hand. She did not see the man across the fairground begin to move. She did not see him until Kaelin said, cheerfully and with great satisfaction, "Papa! I found her!" And Briella looked up. The world tilted approximately 2 degrees. She knew that face. Time does a strange thing when it collapses. Or 3 years of distance folded themselves up in the space of one breath and laid themselves flat between Briella Finch and Harris Brock, like a map of somewhere neither of them had planned to return to. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, as if he understood that closing distance too quickly was the wrong thing to do. He had the look of a man who had learned, through some specific and memorable lesson, that some things needed to be approached the way you approach a fire that might still be burning. She did not run. She stood very still instead, which was somehow worse, because it meant she was choosing to stay. "Briella." His voice was the same. She had not expected it to be the same. "Harris." Kaelin, standing between them with the oblivious joy of someone who has just successfully completed a difficult project, looked from one face to the other and declared, "You know each other. That's good. That means she can definitely be my mummy." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens between people who once almost said something important and then didn't. The kind where everything that was never said fills the air between them like a sound just below hearing. Armani, down directly behind Harris, had discovered a sudden profound interest in a display of handmade leather belts across the path and removed himself from the vicinity with impressive speed. Harris looked at the bird folded in Briella's cloak, then at his son's hand wrapped around hers, then slowly at her face. "Thank you," he said, "for whatever you did for the bird." "Soft fracture," she said. "He'll need a week of rest and careful handling. Oh, the brace needs changing every 2 days." She fixed his shoelace into a brace, Kaelin announced proudly, but she made it better. "She has kind hands, Papa. I told you." Harris looked at her for a moment. Just a moment, with something unguarded in his expression. Then it closed again, carefully, like a window on a cold day. 3 yours, Briella thought. 3 yours, and we're standing at a harvest fair, talking about a bird's wing. She had rehearsed what she would say, once, long ago. Not to Harris specifically, but to the version of this moment she had imagined in the dark of various small rooms in various small towns. She had been very composed in those rehearsals, calm, clear. She had said exactly the right things. None of those things were coming to her now. "We should let you enjoy the fair," she said instead, taking a careful step back. "I'll leave the brace instructions with stay for lunch." Harris said it the way people say things they have thought about quickly and decided to commit to before they can think better of it. Kaelin would like that. Kaelin nodded immediately, and with great enthusiasm. I would definitely like that. She looked at the boy, those grey eyes, bright and earnest, holding no agenda beyond the one completely visible on his face. She looked at Harris, or who was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Something careful and something raw, and something that might have been, underneath it all, simply please. She said yes. Again. The Clover Hollow Inn was warm and smelled of bread and cider. They took a table by the window, Kaelin in the middle, which appeared to be his natural position, and for 20 minutes it was something like ordinary. Kaelin talked about the birds he had found and tried to help over the past year, with the detailed record-keeping of a very small naturalist, a crow with a sprained leg, a robin that flew into Clara Hobbs's window and was stunned for an hour, 2 ducks that had gotten separated from their mother near the mill pond. "I found all of them," he said, with the satisfaction of a man reviewing a strong career. Briella watched him talk. She catalogued him the way she catalogued patients, not coldly, but carefully, the flush at his cheeks that came and went, the occasional flicker in those grey eyes, like a candle touched by a draught, the way his energy ran high and then dipped suddenly, like a lamp with an unsteady wick. Something is wrong with him, she thought. Not loudly. Not immediately. The way a door at the back of your mind opens a small crack. She was reaching for her cup when it happened. Kaelin went quiet. Then very still. Then the small wooden mug in his hand tipped sideways. She was already moving. Her hands found his wrist before the mug hit the table. 2 fingers pressed firm over his pulse. Her palm went to his forehead, pressing flat, reading. The fever came up under her touch like a wave rolling in. Sudden, spiking, wrong. His eyes fluttered once, twice, then went glassy and unfocused. His small body lost its shape all at once, slumping sideways like something whose supports had quietly given way. Harris caught him. He had been close enough. He had always been close enough, and Kaelin came to rest against his father's chest with the boneless trust of a child who has learned that his father is always there to catch him. 30 seconds. The fever spiked and ebbed and vanished like a fire doused with water. Kaelin blinked, looked at his father, then at Briella. "Sorry," he said quietly. "Don't be sorry," Briella said. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice even, professional. The voice she used when the answer to that question mattered more than her own reactions. "It's warm," Kaelin said. "Like when you go under the water and the sound goes away. But then it comes back." She looked at Harris over the top of Kaelin's head. His jaw was tight, his hands wrapped around his son with careful, practiced steadiness, didn't shake. She could see the effort it took to keep them still. "He's been like this for 8 months, Harris said. His voice was quiet, controlled. Or dizziness first, then the fevers. They come at night, after dark, and they're gone by morning. The capital healers call it lunar fatigue, a disorder of the moon tether." He paused. "They have no cure." Briella sat very still. She had seen lunar fatigue twice in her training years. She knew its patterns, the slow, predictable decline, the way it held consistent from episode to episode, What she had just watched was not consistent. The speed of that spike, and the way it vanished all at once, instead of fading. This isn't lunar fatigue, she thought. The door at the back of her mind opened a little wider. She did not say it yet. She needed her kit. She needed a slide and a drop of moonwort essence, and about 8 hours of reading before she said anything at all. Kaelin had fallen into a light doze against Harris's shoulder, one small hand gripping his father's lapel. Harris looked at her. Not the careful, composed look from outside, at the one underneath it, the one that had no room left for composure. "I didn't come to Clover Hollow by accident," he said. "I followed 8 months of rumors. A dark-haired healer, quiet hands, sees more than the symptoms. Knows plants no one else knows." He paused. "I knew it was you before Kaelin ever saw your face. I just didn't know what I was going to say." Briella looked at her hands on the table. "I'd like to know why you left," he said. "I won't ask that today. Today I am only asking you to look at my son." She was quiet for a long moment. Half asleep, Kaelin murmured something against Harris's shoulder. Then, clearly and drowsily, "She already fixed my bird, Papa. She can fix my wolf, too. She has kind hands." Briella's eyes stung. She blinked it down. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "I'll need my full kit and good light. One examination." She met Harris's eyes. No promises. He nodded. That was all. No pressure. No gratitude flooding over everything. Or just a nod, which somehow said more than a speech would have. She walked back to Clara's cottage alone in the early October dark. The daisy Kaelin had tucked behind her ear, somewhere between the second cup of cider and his falling asleep, was still, impossibly, in place. She told herself it was just another patient. She told herself that for exactly as long as it took to get inside Clara's cottage, close the door behind her, slide down to sit on the floor with her back against it, wasn't cry for the first time in 3 years. She wasn't sure, entirely, why she was crying. For Kaelin, who asked strangers to be his mother with such clean and fearless hope. For Harris, whose hands had not shaken while holding his sick child with such carefully learned stillness. For herself, possibly. For the woman who had packed her herbs into a bag 3 years ago and walked away from the only place she had ever felt like she might belong, because a man she had trusted told her a fact about herself that she now, sitting on Clara's cold floor, was beginning to wonder about. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. One examination, she reminded herself. No promises. Outside, in the autumn dark, the daisy fell from her hair onto the floorboards, and she didn't notice. Morning mist sat over Clover Hollow like a held breath. Briella had been awake since before it arrived. She had laid her kit across Clara's oak table with the precision she always used when her hands needed something steady to do, each tool in its exact place, each vial uncorked and recorked to make sure the seals held, moonwort essence, silver-tipped needles, 3 glass slides, the small copper dish she used for mixing. Her herbalist's field kit sat to the left, closed, because she had a feeling she would need it before this was over. She did not examine why she was nervous, or she examined her kit instead. Harris arrived at first light, Kaelin's hand in his, the boy still slightly drowsy, but alert enough to be carrying 2 things of great personal importance. A small carved wooden wolf she had noticed yesterday, tucked into his pocket, and a folded piece of paper that he would not show anyone, which he pressed to his chest with deliberate secrecy before transferring it to his trouser pocket with the gravity of someone safeguarding intelligence documents. Clara Hobbs, who had heard the entire previous day summarized in one breathless rush by Briella at 7 in the morning, took one look at Harris Brock in her doorway and very wisely decided that she needed to check on her hives across the field. Kaelin sat on the examination stool without being asked, and held out his wrist. "I've done this before," he said. "Different healers. I'm very good at holding still." "I can already tell," Briella said. She worked in silence for several minutes. Her fingers moved along his wrist, his throat, the back of his neck, reading pulse, temperature, the particular quality of warmth that ran differently in wolf-blooded children than in others. She listened to his chest with a small, carved earpiece, tracking the rhythm of his heart against the quieter rhythm underneath it. The wolf heart. The second pulse that all wolf-born carried, running slightly deeper than the first, like a shadow of the real one. In a healthy wolf-born child, both rhythms were synchronized, a steady call and answer, perfectly matched. In Kaelin, the second pulse stuttered. Not weakly. Desperately. The way something sounds when it is fighting very hard against something stronger. She did not let her face change. She took the glass slide. A drop of his blood, expressed from a clean needle prick on his fingertip. Kaelin watched with clinical interest, not flinching, narrating his own bravery under his breath in a near whisper. She added 3 drops of moonwort essence, swirled the copper dish once, and transferred the mixture to the slide. The moonwort clouded. In a patient with lunar fatigue, it turned a pale, even grey. Predictable, uniform, steady in the way illness is when it has settled in. This mixture darkened to bruised purple, then cleared unevenly, patches of pale beside patches of deep shadow, like something tearing in slow motion. Briella went perfectly still. Harris was watching her face, the way you watch a weather vane, when you need to know which way the wind is coming from. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were not. She set the slide down. She turned to face him. "What I'm about to tell you is not the answer those capital healers gave you," she said. "And it is worse. But there is a way through it. Or so I need you to hear the hard part first, and hold on to the fact that I wouldn't be telling it to you at all if there weren't a way through." Harris nodded once. Kaelin sat straight on his stool, chin up. She looked at Kaelin first, because he deserved to hear it too. "Kaelin," she said, "you are not broken. What's happening to you is not something that grew inside you. Something was put there, from the outside, by someone who wanted to hurt you. It's called a binding wilt curse." The boy was very quiet for a moment. Then, "Am I broken?" She dropped to both knees immediately, eye level, both hands cupping his small, serious face. "No," she said. "Something bad is trying to hurt you. We are going to stop it." He held her eyes. She could see him processing, not with fear, but with the particular gravity of a child who is deciding whether to trust a fact. He decided. "Okay," he said. "What do we do?" She stood. She told Harris everything. Or the binding wilt curse was ancient, not used in the open packs for 3 generations, because it required a curse mage willing to do work that even most dark practitioners considered crossing a line. It targeted the moon tether, the bond between a wolf-born child's human heart and the wolf spirit that grew alongside it. Without that tether, the wolf spirit strained and flailed and pulled against the child's own life force like a trapped animal chewing through its own limb to get free. It fed on strong emotion, joy, fear, excitement, the full moon's pull. Every time Kaelin felt anything deeply, the curse used that energy to pull harder. "Left untreated," Briella said, "it consumes from the inside, completely. It was designed to look like a natural deterioration. That's why your healers called it lunar fatigue. The pattern mimics it in the early stages. But the blood test is definitive. Or this is not natural." Harris's jaw had been tightening incrementally throughout her explanation. Now it was stone. "Who?" he said. Just the one word. "I don't know yet," Briella said. "But the curse has a signature. Every curse mage leaves one, whether they intend to or not. When we break it, we'll be able to read who commissioned it." Harris looked at his son. She watched something cross his face that was not anger. Exactly. Anger would have been easier to watch. This was the look of a father who has been keeping fear away from his child for 8 months with sheer force of will, and has just been told that the fear was justified, and worse than he thought, and none of his will was ever going to have been enough. "You said there's a way through," he said, very quietly. "A bond bridge healing rite," she said. "It requires 3 days of preparation, building the circle, gathering the anchor materials, preparing the neutralizing compound, for then a single rite at dawn on the 4th day, when the moon tether is most accessible. And it requires someone to act as anchor," she continued. "The rite draws on the healer's life force to hold the fraying edges of the tether together long enough for Kaelin's own strength to come back and reinforce it. Your life force would feed the curse rather than fight it. The Alpha bloodline runs too close to the same frequency. It needs someone neutral." She paused. "Someone with no pack bond, or no Alpha bloodline." Harris looked at her. "You," he said. "Me," she said. Kaelin, who had been following every word with the focused attention of someone sitting a very important exam, raised his hand slightly, like a child in a classroom. "So you'd be like a bridge for my wolf?" "Exactly like that," Briella said. He considered this with tremendous seriousness. Then, "Okay. But if you get tired, you have to tell me, so I can be brave for you too." The space behind Briella's sternum did something she wasn't prepared for. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth and counted to 3 before answering. "Deal," she said. The 3 days began. Harris took the room above Clara's shop. Clara's decision, offered without preamble when she returned from the hives, and sized up the situation in approximately 4 seconds. He appeared each morning before the mist had lifted, bringing breakfast from the inn, or eating at Clara's table with Kaelin between them, and the comfortable rhythm of people who have agreed, without saying it aloud, to try. He chopped wood the first afternoon without being asked. Briella watched him from the kitchen window, while she sorted dried rosehip, telling herself she was checking the woodpile inventory. He split logs with the efficient, focused energy of someone who needed their hands occupied. He fixed the gate hinge that had been wrong since before Briella arrived in Clover Hollow, examining the problem for about 45 seconds before sourcing a replacement pin from somewhere and resetting it clean. He did not do any of these things for credit. He did them the way you do tasks in a house you are hoping to be allowed to stay in, quietly, without announcement, as proof of something that didn't have a word yet. Kaelin, meanwhile, Ned was engineering with the focused tactical certainty of a child who had decided on an outcome and was simply managing the logistics. "Sit here, Moon Lady," he told Briella on the second morning, patting the chair beside his own. "Papa sits better when you're near. He breathes different." "Does he?" Briella said. "More," Kaelin confirmed, as though this were a quantity that could be measured. "He breathes more." That second evening, while Briella read Kaelin a story about a young wolf who gets lost and finds his way home by following the sound of his own heartbeat, the boy fell asleep in her lap. She didn't move. She sat still with his weight warm and trusting across her knees and his dark curls under her hand, and she felt the 3 years of careful distance she had built around herself begin to erode at the edges. Harris sat across the fire, not reading, not pretending to read, just watching the two of them with an expression she didn't see, because she was looking at Kaelin's sleeping face. He had been telling his son bedtime stories about a woman with flower hands for 2 years. He had not expected what it would feel like to watch that woman, smooth his son's curls in the firelight, like she had always known the shape of them. The second evening came down quietly. Kaelin was asleep by the fire, curled on the small reading chair with his wolf carving held against his chest, his breathing slow and even. The fever had not come that evening. The preparation work Briella was doing on the circle was already creating a mild suppression effect, buying him a few hours of peace. Briella and Harris sat on opposite sides of the hearth. The fire had burned down to low orange coals. Outside, wind moved through the old oak at the corner of Clara's property, and the sound of it was the only thing in the room for a while. They had run out of neutral conversation topics somewhere around the second cup of tea. What remained was everything they hadn't said for 3 years, sitting between them like furniture in a room that had gotten too full. Harris spoke first. "You left without a word." Not an accusation. He did not raise his voice. He set it on the table between them, gently, the way you set something fragile down when you are not sure of the surface. Briella looked at the fire. She had thought about this moment in the abstract, over 3 years, in the way you think about things you are simultaneously certain will never happen and cannot stop preparing for. She had always imagined she would be smooth in it, composed. She was not smooth, but she was honest, which was the harder thing to be. "After the solstice ceremony," she said, "I went to the pack healer for a routine wellness check." Harris was very still. "Gregory Turlough. He examined me and he was kind about it. That was the worst part, actually, how kind he was." She paused. "He told me I was incompatible for pack bonding, that a childhood fever had caused permanent damage, that I could never carry a wolf-blooded child." She heard Harris exhale. Not dramatically. The small, controlled kind. "I believed him," she said. "Why would I not? He was a healer. Well, I was a healer. I understood the diagnosis, and I understood what it meant." She pressed her palms flat against her knees. "Not for warmth. You were going to be crowned. The council had the betrothal to Lydia Doolin half arranged, and even without that, a king needs an heir. A pack needs continuity. I didn't want to stand in front of you and make you choose between duty and me and have to watch you lose something either way." She met his eyes, finally. "I thought if I disappeared quietly, or you could move forward, find someone who could give your people what they needed." The fire crackled once, low and settling. "I packed my kit," she said. "I left before morning." Harris did not speak immediately. The silence stretched long enough that she began to wonder, with a cold, creeping feeling, whether she had said too much, whether the story that had been the whole frame of her last 3 years would land here as something smaller than it felt. Some ordinary miscalculation, or nothing worth the weight she had given it. Then he said, "I cancelled the arrangement with Lydia the week after you left." Briella stared at him. "The council was furious," he said, with no particular emotion, like he was reporting the weather. "I didn't care." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely folded. 8 months later, I married Mabel Conway. She was from the Eastern Pack. She was kind and steady, and she laughed at things easily, which I needed then. She gave us Kaelin." His voice softened on the name the way people's voices soften when they say the name of something they love without reservation. "She died 18 months after he was born. A fever. Sudden. Inexplicable, the healers said. We grieved her." He looked at Briella. "She knew," he said quietly, "that I was incomplete somewhere. She never said it to me directly, but she knew the way a good person knows something they've chosen not to name." He paused. Or she deserved better than a man who kept looking at empty doorways. Briella's throat was very tight. "If you had told me," Harris said. Not angry. not reproachful. Steady, the way bedrock is steady, the kind of calm that has been worked for. If you had come to me with what Turlo said, if you had given me one chance to tell you myself what I wanted, I would have chosen you. I would have said exactly that to the council, to the arrangement, to every political expectation in that building, without hesitation. I know that, Briella said softly. I needed you to know it then. The fire popped. A log shifted. The coals breathed. Briella looked at her hands. The hands she had looked at all her life and trusted. The hands that had diagnosed and healed and built 3 years of a careful, invisible life, and thought about all the things those hands had never done because a man she trusted had told her a lie in a kind voice, as in she had believed it because she already half believed she wasn't enough. I should have asked you, she said, instead of deciding alone what you would choose. Yes, he said, not unkindly. You should have. The honesty of it, clean and direct and without softening, made something in her chest relax. She had expected either anger or reassurance. Not this. Simply, quietly, being told the true thing. She looked up. Harris had crossed the room. She hadn't registered him moving. He stood in front of her, and his hand, slow, careful, giving her every moment to step back from it, lifted and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The way you touch something you are still learning to believe is real. She rose slightly, almost without intending to. He leaned down. Their foreheads touched. The space between them, 3 years of it, compressed down to a single breath, held. And then Kaelin murmured in his sleep. A small, unconscious sound. His arm reaching out sideways as though searching for something. They both turned, without discussion, without deciding, both of them at the same instant, turning toward the boy in the chair with the same instinctive reflex that has no name except parenthood. The moment opened instead of closing. It became something larger than what it had been, spreading outward rather than landing. Harris's hand found hers in the dark, beside Kaelin's chair. His fingers laced through hers, and he did not let go. She did not ask him to. They sat with the sleeping boy between them and the fire dying down to embers, and no one said anything else that night, because nothing else needed saying. What neither of them saw, in the narrow alley beside Clara's shop, a figure in a dark travelling cloak sent a signal toward the eastern road. 3 short flashes of mirror light. Found her. In the Northern Pack Palace, 3 days' ride east, Lydia Doolin read the message and set it down. She had dismissed the rumors of an herbalist as paranoia. She saw now that had been a mistake. She was not in the habit of making mistakes twice. Summon my shadows, she said to the guard at her door, her voice perfectly even. All of them. Tonight. The mist came in heavier than usual on the 3rd night. It pressed against the cottage windows like something with intent, thick and grey and close, the kind of mist that muffled sound and made the edges of things disappear. Inside, the fire was steady. The binding circle Briella had spent 3 days building on the floor of Clara's workroom glowed faintly. Silver root dust in careful runes, laid with hours of concentration, everything precisely placed. Kaelin slept on the cot Briella had moved into the workroom, where the circle's partial effect could keep the fever quieter. His colour was better than it had been all week. His wolf carving was in his hand. Harris stood at the window, and watching the dark outside, with the stillness of a man whose instincts have begun telling him something his mind hasn't confirmed yet, Briella was on her knees at the circle's edge, rechecking the rune sequence, a small brush in her hand, her lips moving slightly as she read each symbol. Tomorrow at dawn, she said, without looking up. When the first light clears the mill hill, we begin. The tether is most open in the first 15 minutes of true daylight. We'll be ready, Harris said, to Briella. His voice had changed when he said her name. She had noticed it, and chosen not to examine it, for the same reason she hadn't examined the fact that she had slept better in the past 3 nights than in the past 3 years. She sealed the last rune, sat back on her heels, looked at the circle, the thing she had built these 3 days, that was supposed to save the child sleeping 10 feet away. Hold, she thought at it. Just hold until morning. A sound from outside. Low, guttural. What's wrong? Harris turned from the window. His eyes met hers across the room. The door came in. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment it existed, and the next it was gone, and the night poured through the open frame with 4 shapes inside it. Large, low, fast, burning red-eyed in the dark. Wolves. But not right. Their eyes had the flat, driven look of animals being pushed forward against their own will, foam at their jaws, movements jerky with suppressed resistance. What around each throat, a collar of dull grey metal with runes burned into the surface. Suppression collars, the kind that overrode the wolf's own instinct and replaced it with someone else's command. They're not doing this by choice, Briella registered, from some distant professional corner of her mind. They're being driven. They didn't choose this. Harris shifted. It happened fast. A crack of restructuring bone and muscle, a blur of controlled, deliberate transformation. And then his wolf was in the room, and it was enormous and dark-coated and moved with the terrible efficiency of something that has decided exactly what it is doing. He drove into the first attacker with bone-shaking force, all momentum and weight, angling to put himself between the door and the circle. But the collars blocked Alpha Command. He could not call them off. There was no voice that would reach them. There was only his body, against 4 of them, as in a room with a sick child and a half-built healing circle. Briella swept Kaelin off the cot. The boy woke mid-movement, small limbs flailing, gasping, and then found her face, and went instantly still. His hands gripped her arms. Moon Lady. I have you, she said. I've got you, he said. She would remember that for the rest of her life. She would remember being the one holding him, and him being the one to say, I've got you. She pulled him toward the circle. It wasn't ready. The final binding sequence required dawn light. She had perhaps 6 hours before that. But there was no time and no choice, and she had done more with less before. She pulled him into the circle. Harris had driven back 3 of the 4 wolves. Deep gash across his shoulder, a second across his ribs, bleeding and slowing. When the 4th broke through. Not toward Harris, toward the circle, toward Briella, who was kneeling with one hand already beginning the first line of the rite, and the other arm around Kaelin. She raised her silver knife. Her arm shook. Kaelin slid off her lap. He stood up, stood between her and the wolf, pulled himself up to his full height, which was not much, and spread his arms wide, and his chin went up, and his voice, fever-warm, slightly wavering, didn't waver. You can't have her. The wolf snarled, took 1 step forward. Kaelin didn't move. She's fixing my wolf. You have to go through me first. The wolf snarled again, straining against the collar's command, and for 1 terrible second it surged forward. And Harris roared. The sound hit the walls and the floor and the inside of every chest in that room. Even the collared wolves flinched. It was not a sound that came from a throat. It came from something deeper and older than that. The sound of an alpha who has run out of patience and is now expressing consequence. He drove the 4th wolf back with his full weight, taking a 3rd hit across the flank that he did not seem to feel. Not now. Not with his son standing in the path of something, with his arms spread, and his chin up, and no fear in him, except the kind you feel when you are afraid for someone else. Briella did not hesitate. She pulled Kaelin back into the circle, sat him against her, pressed her palm flat to the binding stone at the circle's center. But the stone had been warmed by 3 days of preparation. It recognized her life force, received it, amplified it. She opened the rite early. The power surged through her like cold water, then like heat, then like something she didn't have a word for. A draining, expanding, enormous draw on everything inside her, the life force running out faster than the circle could sustain. Hold, she thought. Hold, just hold. She felt herself thinning, edges going transparent. Harris, bleeding, the one foreleg dragging slightly, half shifted and fading, pulled himself to the edge of the circle. She could see what it cost him. She could see the venom spreading, the slowing, the determination holding him upright, past the point where upright was reasonable. He pressed his palm over hers on the binding stone. The world changed. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't subtle. It was a door, blown open from the inside, light pouring through where there had only been wall. The mate bond. Not new. She felt that in the first disorienting second. This was not new. This was something that had been there since a winter solstice ceremony 3 years ago, present and patient and suppressed. The curse's hidden work, blocking the alpha bloodline from recognizing what was directly in front of him, while the wilt burned through his son. With his palm pressed over hers, the suppression shattered. The bond ignited like a torch thrown into a dry field. Sudden, total, golden and warm and enormous, flooding the circle in a wave of heat that had nothing to do with fire. She felt it wrap around the right like an additional pair of hands, steadying what she could no longer hold alone, filling the places where her strength had burned out. She drew on it, drew on him, and drove the combined force straight into the heart of the curse. The curse broke. The sound it made was like glass under a hammer, a single, reverberating crack that travelled through every wall of the cottage, through the floor, through the air itself. The suppression collars on the attacking wolves fractured apart, the runes on the metal going dark and dead all at once. The red faded from 4 pairs of eyes. The wolves collapsed, not dead but freed, bewildered, suddenly aware of where they were and what they had been doing, and they fled into the mist without looking back. Kaelin gasped, his back arched, his whole small body going rigid for 1 terrible second, and then released, like a spring unwinding, like something finally able to breathe for the first time in months. His wolf heart, which Briella had been feeling stutter and strain for 3 days, steadied. Synchronized. Call and answer. Perfectly matched, the way it was always supposed to sound. The color that came into his cheeks was not the feverish flush she had been watching for 8 days. It was real. It was his. He opened his eyes. Oh, they were clear. Both rhythms, steady. He gripped her hand with both of his, every small knuckle, all of them, pressing into her palm. "You did it," he whispered. And then his gap-toothed smile arrived, full and bright and entirely uncomplicated. "You fixed my wolf." Briella's strength gave out. The world greyed at the edges, the circle's warmth fading as the mate bond settled into something steady rather than blazing, and she folded forward. Harris caught her, and his arms came around her, one of them slick with blood he hadn't acknowledged, the other solid and certain. And the mate bond between them pulsed once, warm and insistent, and pulled her back from the grey, the way a hand catches someone at the edge of a ledge. "Stay with me," he said against her hair. "Briella, stay." She opened her eyes. Kaelin's face was right there, inches from hers, watching her with the quiet seriousness of a child who has been very frightened and is now deciding how to carry it. "You stayed for us," he said. "So we stay for you." A pause. That's how it works. Outside, the mist was thinning. To the east, the first faint line of dawn light was beginning to clear the mill hill. 2 days later, Harris Brock rode for the palace with his son on the saddle in front of him, and his wounds bandaged, and his expression carrying the specific, a focused calm of a man who has spent 48 hours making decisions he is now ready to execute. Briella rode beside him. She had not been asked to come. She had not been asked, either. She had simply packed her kit and been at the stables before dawn, and Harris had looked at her over the horses and said nothing except, "Kaelin will want to ride near you." Kaelin was luminously, almost offensively healthy. He ran ahead on every path they walked, where it then circled back to make sure they were keeping up. He narrated the plans he had for his wolf, now that it was restored. He was going to learn the valley run first, then the eastern ridge, then possibly, if permitted, the northern forest. Though he understood there were rules about the northern forest, and he was prepared to follow most of them. He had identified 17 things he wanted to do before the next full moon. He had ranked them in order of excitement. But Armani Voss met them at the palace gate with the expression of a man who has been awake for most of 2 days and has news that cannot wait. "Gregory Turlough," he said, looking at Briella. She went still. "He's been in custody since yesterday morning, under truth serum questioning." Armani paused. He broke, 3 hours in. The gate was solid stone under Briella's hand. She pressed her palm flat against it. Gregory Turlough, the healer with the kind voice, who had told her, what in a room that smelled of antiseptic and dried calendula, that she was incompatible for pack bonding, that she could never carry a wolf-blooded child, that the fever she'd had at 9 years old had left permanent damage. She had believed him. For 3 years, she had believed him. "He was paid," Armani said. 3 years ago, by Lady Lydia Doolin." The courtyard was quiet, except for bird song, and the distant sound of Kaelin telling a stable hand about his wolf at length. Harris's hand found the small of her back. He did not speak. He did not try to contain the moment, or explain it, or make it smaller than it was. He simply stood there. She had built 3 years of her life on a lie. Every road she had walked down and left. Every town she had passed through and not stayed in. Every time she had packed her herbs and told herself this was what she chose, the moving, the invisible, the untethered, when the truth was that she had fled, and the thing she had fled from was a manufactured diagnosis delivered in a kind voice by a man who had been paid to drive her out. She had believed it, because she had already been halfway to believing it herself. That was the part that was hard to name, and harder to put down. Harris's thumb pressed lightly against her back, once. She breathed. "Let's finish this," she said. The great hall of the Northern Pack Palace was built for exactly this. High stone ceilings, where the council seated in their curved rows, torches burning along both walls, the specific architecture of consequence. Lydia Doolin stood at the center in a midnight silk gown, her hands loosely bound with a silver cord, her dark eyes moving slowly around the room as though she were appraising a property. She was composed. She had always been composed. It was the most dangerous thing about her. Harris stood at the front of the hall. Briella stood to his left. Kaelin stood between them, for holding both their hands, his wolf carving in his pocket, and the folded piece of paper pressed flat against it. Harris presented the evidence without flourish or theatrics. He had never needed them. Gregory Turlough's full confession, witnessed and sealed, the falsified medical records, the paid diagnosis, or the explicit instructions from Lydia Doolin 3 years ago to drive Briella Finch out of the territory before a mate bond could form and complicate the political arrangements Lydia was building. The Curse Mage's testimony, given under serum in the presence of 6 council witnesses, Lydia had commissioned the binding wilt curse in 2 stages. The first casting was on Mabel Conway, Caylin's mother, designed slower, subtler, engineered to look like natural fever illness. It had worked exactly as designed. Mabel had died 18 months after Caylin's birth, and no one had looked for a cause that required looking. The second casting was on Caylin, once Lydia realized that Mabel's death had not produced the opening she expected. Harris had not turned to her. He had shut himself away with his grief and his son and his duty, and built a wall around all of it that she couldn't get past. Caylin, then, became the final obstacle. Remove the heir, leave Harris broken and isolated. Then arrive as the consoling, steady presence offering a fresh start. The payment ledgers, the shattered suppression collars bearing Lydia's personal ward seal, the 3 witnesses who could place her agents in Clover Hollow on the night of the attack. Lydia listened to all of it without flinching. Her composure did not crack on the evidence. It did not crack on the testimonies. It did not crack on the ledgers or the collars. Then she looked at Briella. When she spoke, she projected her voice deliberately, not to the council, but to the room, to all of it. You were never meant to be here. Her tone was measured, almost clinical. You are a wandering herbalist, with no pack, no bloodline, no political weight. What he needed, what this throne demanded, was continuity. Legacy. A dynasty with roots. I would have given him that. I could have given him what the pack needs to survive the next generation. Her chin lifted. You will give him nothing but an empty cradle and a title that does not fit. The hall was completely silent. Caylin let go of both their hands. He took 2 steps forward. He was the smallest person in the room by a considerable measure. His dark curls were slightly overgrown at the ears. His grey eyes were clear, no fever, no glassiness, no fear. Just the uncomplicated, unguarded honesty of a child who has decided what is true and has simply decided to say it. He looked at Lydia Doolin with those storm-grey eyes, and he spoke. You took my first mama. His voice was steady. You tried to take my second mama, and you tried to make my papa be alone forever. That's 3 bad things. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Mamas don't have to make babies to be mamas. They just have to love you. Briella loves me. She fixed my wolf when she didn't have to. She stayed when she could have left. She held me when I was scared. He paused. You tried to hurt all of us. That's why you're the one who has nothing. Not a single person in the hall moved. Lydia's composure cracked, not gradually, all at once, the way glass cracks from the inside out. Her eyes went bright for one involuntary second, the controlled surface breaking over something underneath that was not defiance, but something smaller and rawer than that. The look of someone confronting a truth that arrived from an unexpected direction. A 6-year-old boy with storm-grey eyes and a gap-toothed smile had said the thing that all the evidence in the world had not quite been able to say, and it had landed. At the moment of sentencing, Lydia's lips moved, barely perceptible, the last syllable of a blood curse she had been building since she walked into the room, a contingency prepared and keyed to her own life force. The mate bond between Harris and Briella, warm and present and absolute, was settled now into something as permanent as bedrock, pulsed once. A single golden pulse of warmth that moved through the hall like a breath. The curse unraveled before it formed, turned back, hit Lydia's own life force like a wave hitting a seawall and breaking backward, and she collapsed to her knees with both hands at her throat and her eyes wide with the disbelief of someone whose most carefully held weapon has just turned in their hands. The council's verdict was unanimous and took 4 minutes. Harris and Briella walked out of the hall with Caylin between them. His hands were in both of theirs, and he walked straight and easy, his wolf heart steady under his ribs, his little feet firm on the stone floor. The council bowed as they passed. The nobles stepped back. 3 years of loss walked behind them, like a shadow they had finally outrun, and didn't look back. The palace settled into a new rhythm in the weeks that followed. The autumn deepened toward winter, and the gardens went gold and red, and Clover Hollow felt, from the palace windows, like something from a story someone had told her once, in another life. Briella was still there. She told herself, in those first days, that she was staying to monitor Caelin's recovery. His wolf was strengthening daily. He ran the garden path every evening with focused, joyful determination, convinced he was getting faster, checking over his shoulder each lap to make sure she was watching. She always was. Harris watched her watch him, which had quietly become its own warm habit, unhurried, unhidden. She ran out of the recovery monitoring excuse somewhere around day 10. After that, she stopped making excuses. She was staying because this place, this palace, this garden, this boy and this man had become the first location in 3 years that felt like somewhere she was supposed to be. Not passing through. They're supposed to be. Pearl Haskins, the palace's head healer, adopted Briella with the cheerful authority of a woman who recognizes a colleague worth keeping. Armani Voss began setting a place for her at the council table as a matter of course, without comment, in the way that loyal people communicate decisions before those decisions are formally made. Clara Hobbs received a very long letter and wrote back 3 pages of questions, 3 pages of opinions, and a postscript that said only, "About time." Caelin, for his part, had moved directly past the concept of uncertainty. He called her Mama with the same natural ease with which he called Harris Papa, not as a test or a request, simply as a fact he had decided and filed and was now operating from. The first time it happened, Briella had stopped what she was doing and held very still, and Caelin had looked up at her and said, "Is that okay?" "Yes," she had said. Very immediately. "That's okay." He had nodded with magnificent satisfaction and gone back to his drawing. The drawing. It happened on a grey afternoon 2 weeks after the trial, when 2 court ladies walked the garden path below the east balcony, silk gowns trailing, voices carrying upward in the cold air, unaware they were being heard. One child. The succession is fragile. The council worries constantly. No heirs, no spare. Everyone knows the Queen is... A pause. A lowered voice that was not low enough. Or she's kind to the boy. No one disputes that. But kindness doesn't fill cradles. Briella, standing at the balcony rail, went still. The old ache moved through her chest, the one she had carried since a cold room, and a kind voice, and a lie she had believed for 3 years. Even now, even with the truth known and the lie named, the wound could be found if someone pressed in exactly the right place. Harris's arms came around her from behind, bracketing hers on the railing. "But they're wrong," he said, quietly, directly. "They have always been wrong." "I know," she said, and she did know it. She just hadn't finished learning to feel it. Below, Caelin came sprinting across the lawn from the garden gate, breathless and luminous, his dark curls blown sideways. He spotted them and changed direction without breaking stride. "Mama! Papa! Did you see? I almost caught a firefly. And I'm definitely faster than last week." Briella knelt as he reached the bottom of the balcony steps, brushing the hair from his forehead, reading his color from habit. Perfect. Bright. Real. "I saw," she said. "Every lap." He studied her face with those grey eyes, observant, unhurried. "Are you sad?" "Just thinking." He put his hand in his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. It had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases had gone soft. He held it out to her with both hands, slightly shy in the way he was only rarely shy, with the things that mattered most to him. "I made this," he said, "because I heard some people in the corridor saying mean things about empty cradles. I didn't like it. So I made this instead." Briella unfolded it with hands that were not entirely steady. 3 figures in bright crayon under a large silver moon. A tall, dark-haired man with a small gold crown. A woman with long hair and gentle hands. They're standing beside him. A small boy between them, holding both their hands, feet planted firmly on green crayon ground. Above them, dots of yellow for fireflies drifting in the dark. Below, in careful, slightly uneven letters, the handwriting of a child who was very serious about every single word. Our family. Mama plus Papa plus me. No empty space. That's all we need. Her tears fell before she could stop them, not the careful, private kind she saved for behind closed doors, but the honest kind, of falling freely in the garden air with her son, and the man she loved watching her and not looking away from it. She pulled Kaelin in, her arms wrapped all the way around him, and she pressed her face into his dark curls, and breathed him in. That particular scent of a child who has been running in cold air, warm and real and entirely herself. "You're right," she whispered. "We are complete." He patted her back with great solemnity. "I know. I've known since the fair." She laughed. It came out wet and real and completely uncontrolled. It was Kaelin who planned the proposal. This was not a surprise. He approached Harris in the stables on a clear, cold morning, with a list written in orange crayon on the back of a drawing he had decided was less important than this. He held it out with the seriousness of a general presenting strategic intelligence. Harris read it. "The Winter Garden. After dinner. Papa kneels down. I do the ring part. The stone from the river I painted silver. She likes flowers, so the jasmine place. Make sure she's happy first." Harris looked at his son for a long moment. "When did you get this wise?" Kaelin lifted one shoulder with magnificent modesty. "I've been watching. You love her. She loves you. She loves me. We all love each other. So the only thing left is the asking part. I read about the asking part. You read about it. In 3 of my books." He held up 3 fingers for clarity. "Why, Papa says I should use multiple sources." Harris folded the list and put it in his breast pocket. "I found her first," Kaelin added, because this was important. "So I should do the ring part." "Agreed," Harris said. The Winter Garden, night-blooming jasmine on the old stone arch. The small bench where, once, on a cold solstice evening 3 years ago, a king who was not yet crowned had sat beside a healer who was not yet gone, and had almost said something he spent 3 years not saying. While Kaelin led Briella down the jasmine path, with a piece of her own scarf tied around her eyes as a blindfold. His design, non-negotiable, announced at dinner with such certainty that it had not occurred to anyone to argue. He was also providing a continuous running narration. "Don't peek. I'm serious. Don't peek. Okay. Here. Stop here. Don't peek." She stopped. "Okay," he said. "Open." She opened her eyes. Harris on one knee. Kaelin directly beside him, also on one knee, both hands extended, and holding a river stone that had been painted silver with careful, thorough strokes. A few spots had been slightly missed. The imperfection made it more itself. "I did the painting myself," Kaelin said immediately. 3 coats. Armani helped with the 3rd one because I ran out of silver, but mostly me. Harris looked up at her. Everything was there. The grief he had carried, the doors he had kept standing at, the bedtime stories he had told a frightened boy about a woman with flower hands, but believing she was gone. The 3 years of absence that turned out to have been built on a lie, told to two people who loved each other, neither of whom had known. It was all there, unguarded, on his face. Not performed, not controlled, simply true. "Briella Finch," he said, "I have spent 3 years standing at windows I didn't know were windows, waiting for something I didn't have a name for, because I told myself I'd already let it go. I have told this boy stories about you when I thought you were gone. I have watched you love him, without hesitation, without conditions, from the moment he asked you a question that most people would have walked away from." His voice roughened slightly. He let it. "I am not asking because of a bond, or a bloodline, or a throne that needs something from you. I am asking because every quiet thing I have ever wanted has had your shape. On every good morning and every long evening and every moment I wanted to turn to someone, it was always going to be you." He paused. "Will you stay? Not for duty. Not for any name I can give you. Just for us. For this. Exactly as we are." Briella was already on her knees before he finished. Her legs had simply stopped being structurally reliable, and she had arrived on the ground in front of him without fully deciding to, and she did not mind at all. She took the silver stone from Kaylin's hands, pressed it to her chest, against her sternum, over the place where the wound had lived for 3 years and was not there anymore. She looked at Kaylin. He was watching her with enormous grey eyes, and one hand pressed flat against his mouth like he was containing something very big. She cupped his small face in both hands. She looked at all the features of him, the curls, the gap-tooth space where his front teeth were still growing in, or the particular seriousness with which he regarded everything he loved. "You," she said. "You are the first yes I ever gave that I didn't understand yet. I said yes to a boy and a broken bird at a harvest fair. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I didn't know what I was walking into." She pressed her forehead to his. "I am so glad I said yes." Then she looked at Harris. "I already stayed," she said. "I stayed the moment I knelt in the mud beside your son, and didn't stand back up. I just didn't know it yet." She held up the silver stone between them. "Yes, without any conditions. Yes." Kaylin threw himself into the middle of both of them with the full, uncalculating, total force of a child who has gotten exactly what he planned for, designed for, and fully intended from the beginning. They stayed like that, the 3 of them tangled together on the cold garden ground under the jasmine arch, laughing and not entirely composed, for a long time. Above them, the moon was almost full. The full moon came up silver bright over the palace garden 3 weeks later, and Briella stood on the east balcony with Harris's arms warm around her, and watched Kaylin run laps in the garden below, trying to catch fireflies, convinced, as he was every evening, that he was getting faster. She had stopped counting her days in Clover Hollow terms. She had stopped thinking of herself as someone passing through. Her kit lived on the healer's room shelf, or not in a pack by the door. Her name was in the palace register, not as a guest, not as a visiting healer, but in the place where it was supposed to have been all along, in the simple, clear ink of something permanent. Below, Kaylin caught a firefly, held his cupped hands up in triumph. She could see the gap-tooth grin from 2 floors up. "He's going to be up for another hour," Harris said against her hair. "He'll be asleep within 20 minutes of coming inside," she said. "He always crashes after firefly season." A pause. "You know his rhythms better than I do," Harris said. "I've been paying close attention." His arms tightened. She thought about the drawing, folded now and kept in her breast pocket, carried everywhere, slightly soft at the creases from being opened, and looked at more times than she could count. The 3 crayon figures under the silver moon. The careful wobbly letters. No empty space. That's all we need. Oh, she thought about a cold morning in a pack healer's office, where a kind voice had told her a lie she believed for 3 years. She thought about all the roads she had walked down since then, all the towns she had drifted through without stopping, all the mornings she had woken up and been nowhere in particular, and been nowhere in particular on purpose. She thought about a harvest fair, a boy in the mud beside a fence post with a shoelace brace and a broken sparrow and storm-grey eyes that looked at her and found home before she knew she was looking for it. She thought about saying yes. Below, Kaelin had stopped running. He stood in the centre of the garden in the moonlight, small and upright and entirely himself, and he looked up at the balcony with his hands still cupped around his firefly. "Mama," he called up, clear and easy, the word carrying no weight except love. "Oh, come down. The fireflies are better from the grass." She leaned over the railing. "Give me 1 minute." 1 minute, he agreed, in the tone of someone who fully intends to start counting immediately. Harris leaned down, forehead to hers, his voice low and near and only for her. "You are my mate, his mother, my queen. Not because of what you could give a throne, not ever that, but because you are the one who kneels in the mud for broken things. Because you stayed when you could have left, because you said yes when you could have walked away, and you kept saying yes with every day you chose to be here." He pressed his lips to her temple. "You have always been enough. You have been more than enough. Every day I get to say so." Her eyes stung. She let them. "Papa's going to cry again," Kaelin announced from the garden below, because he had been listening. "Happy tears," Harris called down. A short pause. "Oh," Kaelin said. "Okay. Me too then." Briella laughed. It came out bright and completely uncontrolled, and she let it carry across the garden in the cold, clear night air, and Harris pulled her close, and she felt Kaelin crash into both their legs a moment later, as he came up the balcony steps at a run, still cupping the firefly, too impatient to wait for 1 full minute. "I caught it," he said, breathless. "I actually caught it. Papa, I'm faster. I told you." "You told me," Harris agreed. Kaelin opened his hands, a small fraction, but the firefly paused, a single warm pulse of gold in the dark, and then lifted, unhurried, into the night air above the 3 of them, and was gone. Kaelin watched it go. "That's okay," he said, with great peace. "He can go. We have everything we need right here." The moon was full and bright over the palace garden, and under it 3 people stood close together with no space between them, and no need for any, and the old wound in Briella Finch's chest, the one that had been there since a healer spoke a lie in a kind voice, and she had believed it because she was already halfway to believing she was not enough. That wound was closed. Not because it had never existed, but because love, small, stubborn, gap-toothed, fearless love, had grown over it like ivy over stone, and all that remained was the shape of something whole.